She had always been a ghost, not in the way that frightened children or haunted old houses, but in the way that made her unforgettable precisely because no one could remember her. In a crowded room, eyes would slide past her as if she were part of the furniture. In a formation of sailors, she was just another face in the blue abyss of uniforms. This was not a curse. It was a weapon she had spent her entire adult life sharpening. Her name was Leah James, and for the past 8 years, she had belonged to an elite fraternity so shrouded in secrecy that the government itself denied its existence in any meaningful way. She was a Navy SEAL, one of the few women to have ever survived the crucible of training, though no one outside of a handful of commanding officers and her teammates knew it. In her current assignment, she was known simply as Petty Officer James, a quietly competent logistics specialist assigned to a naval base in Norfolk, Virginia. It was a cover so boring, so utterly mundane, that it was perfect. The surface detail of her life was a masterclass in misdirection. She lived in a small, sparsely furnished apartment that held no photographs, no mementos from past deployments. Her neighbors knew her as the quiet young woman who left for work before the sun rose and came home long after it set. They assumed she was a clerk, or maybe worked in IT. They never asked, and she never offered. Inside her, however, was a landscape carved by experiences that would shatter the minds of most. She had walked the dry, dusty wadis of Afghanistan under a moonless sky, her heart rate steady as she cleared rooms with her team. She had breathed the humid, oppressive air of the Philippine jungles, tracking targets through the dense foliage. She had felt the icy grip of the Pacific Ocean during a hellish night swim, her muscles screaming in protest as she pushed forward, mile after mile. But here, in the fluorescent-lit purgatory of the Norfolk Naval Base, she was invisible. And she liked it that way. It was a different kind of mission, a test of a different kind of fortitude. The enemy here wasn't a terrorist with an AK-47, it was the soul-crushing boredom of paperwork, the casual sexism of colleagues who saw her as a novelty, and the constant gnawing need to suppress every single instinct that had been drilled into her. The incident that would shatter her carefully constructed world began on a Tuesday. It was a gray, drizzly afternoon that matched the mood in the administrative building. Leah was at her desk, processing the endless sea of requisition forms for vehicle parts, when the door to the office slammed open. A man walked in, his presence immediately filling the room like a physical force. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the ramrod-straight posture of an officer and a face that seemed permanently fixed in an expression of barely contained contempt. He wore the uniform of a lieutenant, and the name tape above his left breast pocket read, Sullivan. Lieutenant Marcus Sullivan was the new division officer, transferred from a surface warfare command. He was a man who had spent his career on the bridge of a destroyer, a world of polished brass and crisp salutes where his authority was never questioned. He was a competent officer by all accounts, but he possessed the particular arrogance of a man who had never been truly challenged. He saw the world in neat, binary terms: officers and enlisted, men and women, superiors and subordinates. He knew how to command a ship, but he had no idea how to lead people. His eyes scanned the room, a bull in a china shop looking for something to break. They landed on Leah. "You!" he barked, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. "James, my office, now!" Leah looked up from her screen, her expression neutral. She had been expecting this. Word traveled fast in a small command. The new lieutenant was a screamer. He liked to establish dominance by belittling his enlisted staff, and she had been told he had a particular problem with women in the Navy. She rose slowly, deliberately, a technique she had learned to de-escalate aggressive men. Never match their frantic energy. Move slow, speak soft, observe everything. She followed him into his adjoining office, a cramped space with a metal desk and a window that looked out onto the gray parking lot. He didn't offer her a seat. He rounded his desk and stood behind it, using the furniture as a barrier and a symbol of his authority. "Close the door," he commanded. She did, and then stood at a modified version of parade rest, her hands clasped behind her back. "I've been going over the supply chain logs for the last quarter," he began, his voice dripping with accusation. "There are discrepancies, missing signatures, delays in processing that are unacceptable. This division has been running like a bunch of damn civilians, and that ends now." Leah knew the logs. She had practically written them. There were no discrepancies. "Sir, I personally reconciled those logs last week. There were a few forms that were misfiled due to a new software update, but they were corrected and signed off by Chief Watson." He slammed his hand on the desk, the sharp crack making the pens jump. "Don't you dare talk back to me! I didn't ask for your excuses. I am telling you there is a problem, and you are going to fix it. You are going to stay here until midnight every night this week if you have to, and you are going to go over every single line until it's perfect. Is that understood?" Leah kept her eyes fixed on a point on the wall just over his shoulder. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. This wasn't about the logs. This was about control. This was a man trying to put her in her place. The old her, the SEAL, would have had a dozen ways to handle this, none of them appropriate for a naval office. The Leah James of this cover story just had to take it. "Understood, sir," she said, her voice flat. Her compliance seemed to infuriate him further. He wanted a fight. He wanted her to argue so he could crush her. "What was that? I can't hear you. Are you crying? Are you going to start crying on me now, James?" "No, sir." He walked around the desk, getting closer to her. He was trying to use his physical size to intimidate her. He was 6'2", easily 220 pounds. Leah was 5'6", lean and compact. To him, she must have looked like an easy target. "I've seen your type before," he sneered, circling her slowly. "Women who think they can waltz into the Navy and get handed everything. You take up space. You create problems. You're a distraction. My last command, we had a female sailor who caused nothing but drama. Ended up getting a captain's mast for fraternization. You all just can't help yourselves, can you?" The words were designed to wound. They were designed to make her feel small. But Leah had been called far worse by men with far more legitimate reasons to hate her. She had been called a traitor by enemy combatants, a demon by men she was hunting, a bitch by teammates who couldn't keep up. The words of a spoiled lieutenant washed over her like water off a duck's back. She remained completely still, her breathing even. Her silence was more powerful than any retort. It was a void that his anger couldn't fill. He stopped circling and stood directly in front of her, his face inches from hers. She could smell the coffee on his breath. "You think you're better than me?" he whispered, the menace in his voice thick. "You think because you can push a pencil you're something special? You're nothing. You're a worthless, enlisted pencil pusher. I am an officer. I am a gentleman, and you will show me the respect I am due." He was waiting for a reaction, a flinch, a tear, a glance away. He got none. Leah's eyes were calm, gray, and as unreadable as a winter sky. She was cataloging him. The slight tremor in his right hand, the vein pulsing in his forehead, the way he shifted his weight onto his back foot. He was all bluster, no real threat. A cornered dog that barked but wouldn't bite. But he did bite. Enraged by her passivity, by her refusal to be cowed, he snapped. His right arm drew back, a clumsy, telegraphed motion, and he punched her. It wasn't a fighter's punch. It was an amateur's swing, fueled by rage, his fist connecting with the side of her jaw. The impact was dull, wet sound. It rocked her head to the side, but her body didn't move. She didn't stumble. She didn't fall. To Lieutenant Sullivan, it must have felt like punching a brick wall. For Leah, it was like a key turning in a lock. The world, which had been gray and bureaucratic, suddenly snapped into sharp, hyper-real focus. The dull ache in her jaw was a signal, not of pain, but of information. It told her the angle of the strike, the lack of follow-through, the assailant's complete lack of balance. Her training, the deepest, most primal part of her being, took over. Adrenaline flooded her system, not with fear, but with a cold, crystalline clarity. The room dissolved. The desk, the filing cabinets, the gray parking lot outside, it all became irrelevant. There was only the threat. In less than a second, her mind processed a dozen different ways to end the conflict. A swift, brutal elbow to his solar plexus would drop him, gasping for air. A knife-hand strike to his throat would collapse his windpipe. A simple leg sweep would put him on the ground, where she could control him completely. Her body was coiled, a spring under immense tension, ready to unleash a force this man could not even begin to comprehend. But another part of her brain, the part that had spent years living under a cover, screamed louder. You are Petty Officer James. You are a logistics specialist. You are not here. The conflict raged internally for a microsecond. Then she made a conscious choice. She uncoiled the spring. She took a slow, deliberate step backward, creating space. She did not rub her jaw. She did not show any sign that the punch had hurt, even though a hot throb was beginning to spread. She simply looked at him. And for the first time, her gaze wasn't neutral. It was flat, dead. It was the look of a predator assessing something that was not prey, but an obstacle. Sullivan saw the look. He saw something shift behind her eyes, something ancient and terrifying that did not belong in the body of a quiet logistics specialist. His anger was instantly doused by a wave of ice-cold confusion. What was that? For a fleeting second, he felt a primal jolt of fear, a lizard brain instinct that screamed at him that he had just made a catastrophic mistake. In that moment, he didn't see a woman. He didn't see an enlisted sailor. He saw something that looked back at him from a place he couldn't fathom. The air in the room became heavy, charged with an unspoken violence that had been summoned and then, impossibly, dismissed. Leah spoke, her voice quiet and steady. It was the same flat, professional tone she had used all along, but now it carried an undercurrent of steel. "Permission to return to my duties, sir." The words were the perfect regulation response. They were a lifeline, a chance for him to retreat from the abyss he had just stared into. He should have taken it. He should have dismissed her, sat down, and spent the rest of his career wondering about the strange, frightening moment he had just experienced. But Marcus Sullivan was not a man who knew how to retreat. The flash of fear was quickly replaced by a surge of denial. It was impossible. It was a trick of the light. He had just been intimidated by a female sailor he had punched. The shame of that realization curdled instantly back into rage. How dare she look at him like that? How dare she make him feel like the subordinate? "No," he snarled, his voice shaking slightly. "You don't get to walk away. You're going to stand right there while I call the shore patrol. You're going to tell them how you provoked an officer, how you threatened me. It'll be your word against mine, James. And who do you think they're going to believe? Me? Or some nothing of a woman who can't even file paperwork correctly?" He reached for his desk phone. Leah remained motionless. She watched his hand, saw the slight tremble in his fingers as he punched in a number. This was escalating. This was leaving the controlled environment of an office confrontation and entering the messy, public world of a formal complaint. It was the one thing her cover couldn't afford. An investigation would peel back the layers. People would ask questions. Her file, so carefully curated to be boring, would be scrutinized. And somewhere in a classified server, her real record would ping. She had a split-second decision to make. Let the situation spin out of control, or stop it. If she let him call, her career, her life, her very identity would be put at risk. Her team was counting on her to remain a ghost. A dozen missions, past and future, depended on her anonymity. She couldn't let one arrogant, violent man destroy all of that. As his finger hovered over the last digit, Leah moved. It wasn't a fast, aggressive movement. It was a simple step forward, a silent glide that brought her to the edge of his desk. She reached out and gently pressed the disconnect button on the phone. "Don't do that, sir," she said quietly. "It would be a mistake." He stared at her hand on the phone, then up at her face. The audacity, an enlisted sailor touching his phone. "Get your hand off my desk. That's it. You're under arrest." "I don't think so," Leah said. She reached slowly into the pocket of her trousers. Sullivan flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a small black leather wallet. She flipped it open and placed it on the desk in front of him. Inside was her military ID, the one that identified her as Petty Officer James. But behind the clear plastic window there was another card. It was black, with a gold trident embossed on it. Below the trident, in simple lettering, it read, U.S. Navy SEAL. There was no name, only a code. Sullivan stared at it. He didn't understand. His brain refused to process the information. What is this? Some kind of joke? It's not a joke, Lieutenant. It's your worst nightmare. Leah's voice was still calm, but it was different now. The passive, compliant tone was gone. In its place was the quiet, unmistakable authority of someone who had earned the right to be feared. My name is Leah James. I'm a Chief Petty Officer in the United States Navy, and for the last 3 years I've been assigned to a special operations unit that you do not have the clearance to know exists. This job, here, in this office, it's a cover. The color drained from Sullivan's face. He looked from the black ID card to her face, then back again. He saw her differently now. The unremarkable features suddenly seemed sharp, dangerous. The quiet posture was not submission, but coiled readiness. He remembered the feeling of punching her jaw, the solid, unmoving resistance of it. He had just assaulted a Navy SEAL. You can't be, he stammered. There are no women SEALs. That's what they want you to think, Leah said. She picked up the wallet and put it back in her pocket. Now, you have a choice. You can call the shore patrol. You can tell them you punched a female sailor. They'll come. They'll take my statement. And then a few very serious men in very serious suits will come to see you. They'll ask you a lot of questions about what you saw in this office, what you think you know. And then, Lieutenant Sullivan, you will disappear. Not physically, but professionally. Your security clearance will be revoked. Your career will be over. You'll spend the rest of your Navy life counting pencils in a warehouse in North Dakota. That's one option. She let the words hang in the air. He was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Option 2, she continued. You sit down. You take a deep breath. You forget this conversation ever happened. You forget you ever saw that card. Tomorrow you come in and you treat every sailor in this division, male or female, with the professional respect they deserve. You forget about the logs. You forget about my jaw. And I forget about the fact that you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Sullivan sank into his chair. His legs had given out. He looked at her, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the predator hidden in plain sight. He saw the years of unimaginable training in the steady set of her shoulders. He saw the kill houses and the combat zones in the calm of her gray eyes. He saw a power so absolute, so far beyond his own, that his pathetic attempt at dominance was laughable. He was utterly, completely broken. Leah didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked out of his office, closing the door softly behind her. She returned to her desk, sat down, and stared at the requisition forms on her screen. The dull throb in her jaw was a steady reminder of the past 5 minutes. She didn't touch it. She didn't react. To anyone watching, she had simply returned from a routine meeting with the new lieutenant. But inside, the ghost was rattled. The incident was a breach, a crack in her anonymity. She would have to file a report, not with her Navy chain of command, but with her actual handlers. There would be questions. There might be a reassignment. The life she had carefully built was now potentially compromised, all because of one man's rage. An hour later, her desk phone rang. It was the secure line. She answered. Yes? Chief, a voice said, distorted by encryption. We have a situation. A Lieutenant Sullivan just made a call to the base security office. He rescinded it immediately, but it was logged. He sounded agitated. What happened? Leah leaned back in her chair and looked out the window at the gray sky. The rain had stopped. A sliver of weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. She thought of the look on Sullivan's face when he saw the trident. She thought of the fear in his eyes. Nothing, she said into the phone. A minor misunderstanding. It's been handled. She hung up. For now, it was handled. The ghost would remain a ghost a little while longer. But as she turned back to her paperwork, she knew one thing for certain. Lieutenant Marcus Sullivan would never look at another woman in uniform the same way again. And every time he closed his eyes, he would see her. Not Petty Officer James, the quiet clerk, but Chief Leah James, the Navy SEAL, the ghost he had been foolish enough to try and punch.